Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about resistors. And a lot of interesting comments from some of my other videos. I'd mentioned in one of my videos that I thought something was a quote-unquote sweet-sounding resistor. and we got some messages back from some people that were like, literally like having a hissy, foaming at the mouth. What are you talking about, a sweet-sounding resistor? What are you talking about? They all sound the same. If it measures the same, it sounds the same. So, I would, me and a lot of other people, I think we disagree on some accounts. So I just kind of wanted to review different types of resistors, and I don't think a video has ever been done on this, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to look at them a little more closely. So what we have here is, this is a Dale. I believe it's an RN55. It's a 1/4 watt metal film, and this came out of it came out of the phono stage, the Aragon 47K, and we can try and see a look at it here, and you can see it's kind of encapsulated in this kind of enameled material, and the RN55s and RN60s, the Dale resistors, are a really nice resistor. Now this is a 1/4 watt. It's very small, but they were a mil-spec resistor, 1% metal film, and they came out of the military industrial complex. They were made for very specific areas, and they made it into audio because of their very tight tolerances. And I think these are generally, these were usually used in some very expensive equipment, and it's generally accepted as a nice sounding resistor. They're quiet, they're not overly noisy, they're relatively low inductance, and in circuits that people are listening to, they generally kind of had a sweeter sound. So what does that mean, a sweeter sound? So I think there's a little more emphasis maybe on the mid-range with these. They don't really do anything bad. They don't sound harsh or overly metallic or overly grainy. It's a relatively smooth sound, but that's what they are. These are the little Dale resistors. You'll find them in a lot of equipment dating from the 90s to 2000s. Not so much anymore, but they're a good sounding resistor. So to add some context to this, here is a audio note resistor. This is a 2 watt, and you can see the huge difference in size. Now this is an audio note tantalum resistor. So the tantalum resistors, I think these started coming out around 2012 or so, the audio note tantalums, and they are made with a tantalum metal film, and they're made via what's called a sputter process, which is a more expensive process for resistor making. And then the end caps are brass, I believe, or no, actually the end caps, I think it's an oxygen-free copper. I could be wrong on that. And then the leads are also an oxygen-free copper that's tin coated. So these are a very nice resistor. Now these tend to sound very nice and warm in the mid-range, and some people say they have a little more emphasis on the highs, but sometimes they can be they're depending on where you use them at. The tantalums are really smooth and warm, so that could be a good thing or maybe a bad thing. Some people might say they're a little boring, but they sound really nice. And this one is going to be used. This is a 2.2K. This is going to be used as a grid stopper and a KT88 amp. But that gives you a little context. You can see the size difference between the 1/4 watt and the 2 watt. Now another audio note resistor that's pretty popular are the audio note silver tantalums. Now this is a silver tantalum, which means actual silver is used in the construction of this resistor. So I believe the end caps are made out of silver, and the lead wires are pure silver. So a lot of people say, well, silver, what difference does that make? Well, it sounds different than the regular tantalum. I can't explain it, but it does. So one engineering principle from being silver, silver is typically more conductive than copper, right? So that's going to make some difference. And actually the oxides, when copper builds up its oxides, when it starts to corrode, it usually builds up little oxides on the outside of the metal that tend to be tend to be less conductive. Silver, on the other hand, when it tarnishes, that black stuff, if you've ever had grandma's teapot or grandma's silver pot or something that got all black and tarnished, well, those oxides are actually more conductive than the silver itself, which isn't a bad thing when you're trying to build an audio circuit, right? So over time, I would expect the sound not to degrade from oxidation with the silver tantalum. But these sound sweet. They are noted to be very transparent, very dynamic. And again, you can see this is a 2-watt resistor, and you can see the size difference between that and the quarter watt. So here's going back a few years. Here's a VISHAY resistor. Now this is a VISHAY bulk metal film resistor, and you can see this is a metal film. It's a little different than the other resistors, and the resistor is encased in this plastic epoxy. It's not really epoxy, it's more of a plastic. So the film resistors are known for being very low inductance and very quiet. These were used, this is out of a Conrad Johnson preamp, and these were used a lot. Actually, they've been used by Conrad Johnson forever, for about 30 years. So this is out of a Premier 10, which is about over 30 years old at this point. So these are nice, and back in the 90s, these were some of the nicest resistors you could get. Again, another mil spec part. But compared to the tantalums, I don't think they're as nice sounding. I've replaced these in a Premier 10 with some tantalums, both the silver and the standard tantalum, and I don't think they compare. I mean, compared to maybe something like a larger size Dale or a standard metal film, yeah, these would be a revelation. But I don't think they stand up to the more modern resistor choices that we have today. They're still really nice sounding, don't get me wrong. I mean, Conrad Johnson uses them in their current designs, and they're a good sounding resistor. I just think there's better options out there today. So another nice option is when you're going from a metal film, this is an AmTrans AMRG. So you can see this is also a 2-watt resistor. It's very large. And these are, somewhat of a descendant of the Riken carbon film resistors. This is also a carbon film, if I didn't already say that. And the leads are copper colored, and they're covered in gold, which does prevent oxidation, which is nice, and they look pretty. But being a carbon film, these tend to sound, I think, a little more musical than metal films. I like these a lot. I would use these eagerly, just as I would one of the tantalums. It just depends on the circuit or the area, right? So it depends, for an output resistor, or maybe even an input resistor, or a cathode resistor. I've had really good luck using these on the cathode. They just have a very dynamic sound. So an interesting note on the AMRGs is that on one design that I put these in, at first I turned it on and they sounded really thick with too much emphasis on the bass and kind of a bloated mid-range. I'm like, oh my gosh, what a mistake. But I have to tell you, after about 50 hours, they dramatically change. And I think out of any resistor that I've ever heard in a design, the AMRGs drastically seem to change their personality. They really smooth out after about 20 to 50 hours. So if you put these in a design, and you plug it in and you turn it on and you're like, oh my God, it's not working. Just give it some time. I'm telling you, give it 30 to 50 hours of playtime, and it will be a night and day difference with these AMRGs. I really, really like these. So another resistor we can look at is the old, this is also tantalum. This is a Shinkoh. These have a huge cult following. This is a 1/2 watt, and a 1/2 watt is more of a standard size, and you can see the difference between the 1/2 watt and the 1/4 watt and the 2 watt, right? So you'll see 1/2 watt used in a lot of preamps. This is more of a standard size, but if you have an opportunity to replace a 1/2 watt with a larger size, do it. It usually will improve the sound quality. And I can go into reasons in a different video about why that is, but they do. So if you can use a larger size, I would do that. So the Shinkohs are pretty hard to find. They've been out of production for quite some time. These are also a tantalum, but they're known for just really having a beautiful, musical dynamic sound. Another resistor. Here's another half-watt resistor. We'll see how this compares to the Shinkoh. This is a Takman. Now, this is also, well, not also, but this is in contrast to the Shinkoh, which is a tantalum metal film. This is a carbon film, much like the AMRG over here. So the Takman is a carbon film, and they kind of have this pink color. These are also a very nice, warm-sounding resistor, very dynamic and very nice. And like I said, I'm finding that I tend to like the carbon films better than the metal films in most applications. And here is another carbon film resistor. This is a Kiawame, also known as the Koas, which are basically the same resistor, or the KOAs. So this is also carbon film. These are really nice. These have quite the following in Japan. They're kind of an old school resistor, you know, but they sound good. They're very warm and they're very quiet. They're actually quieter than a lot of metal films. So these also work very good as like a cathode resistor or something like that, or maybe even, you know, depending on using them in a solid state design. And they're very small. So this is actually a 2-watt. This is a 2-watt, and you can see the difference in size between the 2-watt audio notes and the 2-watt Kiawame. So, you know, the Kiawame or the KOAs they're much smaller. They're very small. So that has some advantages. You know, maybe you have a design that's very very busy or very compact in, and you don't have a lot of space, and you need a smaller resistor with a higher voltage rating. You know, these would work very well in that application. And they're very quiet, very nice resistor. And now we'll also look at one of the newer resistors. This is called a Z-foil. This is made by VISHAY. And you can see this, you know, this is drastically different in construction compared to the traditional resistors that we've been looking at. Now, the Z-foil is what's considered a kind of a foil. It's also a foil resistor like the earlier VISHAY, but this is called a naked foil. So these are known to be very, very transparent. So, you know, they don't really have a distinguished sound. They don't sound noisy. They don't sound thick or warm. They're very transparent. They're kind of called the anti-resistor, right? So these work very nicely in phono stages. If you're an analog and you're using, you're an analog fanatic and you really want loading resistors that are extremely transparent and very low noise, this is about the best that you can get. So sometimes transparency, though, cannot always be a good thing, right? So sometimes if you put this in a circuit and it's overly transparent, it might sound a little cold, right? It might emphasize what is upstream in the circuit, you know, and actually, instead of smoothing out, you know, the grain, maybe in a solid state design, it might actually make it sound more cold or more sterile and less dynamic. So again, placement and application is really important in all of these. So this works really well in my experience as maybe a loading resistor in a phono stage, or it's super low inductance, right? Super low inductance like a carbon comp. So you could use it as like a 1K resistor for a grid resistor. That would work well, or an input resistor might be very nicely, or for feedback resistors. I do really like the Z-foils in a feedback circuit, like a low-level circuit in a preamp for feedback or something like that, replacing a standard metal film. So anyways, here's a bunch of different resistors. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's interesting to kind of show the different type of resistors that are available for DIY applications now. And you know, I'm sure I'll get even more flames from EE types on there, but maybe this is new, and hopefully people have an open mind, and you know, it's not just hocus pocus. I think the construction qualities and the specification qualities and the material qualities do affect the sound quality in this stuff. If you don't believe me, try it and see. It's a fun experiment. All right, thanks again, and more to come.